Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Drilldown with Marty Stetzer. This podcast is part of our EKTI Oil and Gas Learning Network and brought to you by Oil 101, our free introduction to oil and gas. Today, I'll be speaking with John Farina, a longtime friend and industry veteran. This is our first podcast with John, an upstream expert. We are really happy to have his help in focusing on this very important part of the business. John, welcome.
Thanks, Marty. It's really good to be here.
John, can you give our listeners your background?
Well, Marty, I started in the industry about 48 years ago when I first came out of college with a Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Engineering. I went to work for a Shell Oil Company, worked there about 8 years. And after about 8 years, I realized I was learning a great deal about evaluating and designing drilling programs for oil and gas wells, but I didn't really understand the overview of the microeconomics on how oil companies made money. So I started looking around to learn more about the economic side of the business. Got an opportunity to go to work as a production manager for Snyder and Meckel Associates. That was a small oil and gas exploration company that had two exploration geologists as the owners, a well log analyst, a landman, and me. As the only engineer, I got to be the production manager. It was a wonderful learning opportunity. I worked for them for about 6 or 7 years. As the production manager in a small company like this, I got a chance to see exploration at the root, how it got started, how the geologists decided where to drill. Got an opportunity to supervise the drilling and evaluation of the wells, also design the completion programs for the wells, and tied the wells into the pipeline and started selling gas on the pipeline. So I got a really good view of how exploration companies make money, and that was a very good learning experience for me. After about 6 or 7 years, I left Snyder Meckel Associates and became a consultant, and I've been consulting since about 1986. I think the only thing about my consulting that I'd like to share with you is that from my standpoint, I spend about 20% to 25% of my time doing seminars, technical seminars or overview seminars for the industry, and I spend the remaining 75% as an active consultant, so that the training that I do, I feel is more informed because I'm consulting actively today, not talking about what I did 10 or 15 years ago. So I think it can be very helpful in my training, and the training helps me in my consulting.
John, thanks very much for being part of EKTI. We originally met through the Society of Petroleum Engineers New Hire Orientation, I think in 2007. Can you tell our listeners who are interested in the industry what they can get from attending the upcoming session on May 17th in Houston?
The Oil Patch Orientation, Marty, is for those people who want to get a quick overview of the upstream portion of the industry. As you're aware of, the oil and gas industry is separated into upstream, midstream, and downstream. The downstream is refining and processing. Midstream is transportation and pipelines. The upstream is for those companies that are involved in exploring for, drilling, and producing oil and gas. Our seminar on May the 17th is involved strictly in the upstream part of the business for exploration and production. For people who are not familiar with that, this is a high-level overview of the oil and gas industry where we can talk about everything from why we are drilling the wells, a little bit of the geology behind it, and then how we go about drilling wells, evaluating them, stimulating them, even going into the facilities involved in handling the fluids that are produced, and how it's done offshore. So it's a real quick overview of the oil and gas industry.
I have participated with John in probably 7 or 8 sessions since 2007. My role is to usually add the industry perspective. Everybody always keeps asking me my forecast of crude price at the end of those sessions, but I guess I'm just going to have to wait and figure out what that is. If I could forecast crude price, I'd be doing something else besides teaching at the SPE seminars. John, you bring an interesting perspective to your training and your consulting because you've worked for big oil companies like Shell and also independents like the company that you described. Is there any way that you could kind of characterize some of the challenges that the independents are facing right now with the collapse in crude price?
Well, I think, Marty, for a lot of the independents, the shale offered an extremely unusual opportunity on onshore, and a lot of the smaller companies took advantage of that, and they jumped in both feet into the shale and started a contest of how quickly they could lease up and control as much lease operations or leases as they could. As they began drilling the wells, one of the characteristics of these unconventional tight shale reservoirs is that the wells come on at an extremely high rate, but they drop off very, very rapidly. The problem with that is that quite often you're faced with drilling the next well, making a capital expenditure before you've entirely paid out the previous well. As a result, a lot of the independents were forced to borrow a lot of money to continue the operations and maintain their position. When oil prices dropped rapidly, as suddenly as they did, unfortunately that left these loans at risk, and it's put a lot of the smaller independent companies at risk financially because of their debt.
John, thanks very much for that. You can start to see our listeners would be very interested in some of the technology developments that are helping both the independents and the majors. But on the training side, you told me you did a really interesting seminar recently that I think our listeners would find of interest.
Marty, yes. Brian Musso and I did a couple-hour seminar for the Houston Division of Order Analysts on April 20th. The title of my little talk was The Keys to Unlocking a Shale Bonanza, Horizontal Drilling and Fracking. And the hottest thing in the industry over the last 10 years has been this shale. And it's been a fascinating opportunity for me in my 48 years in the industry. This has been the most interesting time that I've had in my whole career to watch this shale bonanza develop. And the combination of technology influencing and driving that development has been fascinating for me to watch. With the shales, we've known about those for 40 years, so the fact that this is new to the industry is not really new to the old-timers who have been around a while. We always knew there were hydrocarbons in those shales. The problem is we had no way to figure out, or we had not figured out how to develop them economically. We've taken some technologies, and a lot of the media calls it new technology. It's not really new. The horizontal drilling we've been doing since the middle 70s, hydraulic fracture treating since the late 40s, early 50s. So these are really two old technologies. What's new that developed and became the keys to unlocking these non-commercial shale plays was the fact that we combined those two technologies in a new way. We drilled the horizontal wells, which allowed us now to do multi-stage fracking, as many as 10 to 30 stack stages in these horizontal wells that allowed us now to contact enough of the oil and gas charged reservoir and connect it to the wellbore through these fracture treatments to now be able to produce the hydrocarbons out of these shales at economic rates and recover enough hydrocarbons to make it profitable at $100 oil. At $40 oil, this becomes more questionable, and that's the dilemma we're in now.
So some of the shale plays I've read, John, are profitable at 40, like in the Permian Basin, but others have just not been profitable. So this is one of the reasons the rig count has just collapsed as the crude price is coming down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, Marty. And the big problem with the shale plays are these multi-stage frac jobs that I mentioned. The frac stages are very expensive. And when you do 10 to 20 of those, that drives the well costs up significantly. Now, we still can make some of them profitable at $40. The key there is that they're shallow enough that the well costs are not extremely high. And with the improved technology, as we learn more and more about how to drill and fracture these wells, that's helped a lot too, because we've been able to bring down the cost by reducing the time required to drill the wells. And then the third thing is the cost benefits or the discounts that we're getting from the service companies have now allowed us to drill the wells and stimulate them probably for 40 to 50% less than we were doing this 4 or 5 years ago, which now has made it economic at the lower oil prices.
So a lot of our listeners have seen the devastation that's had an impact on the oilfield service and supply companies with, massive reductions in staff at the Schlumbergers, the Halliburtons, the Baker Hugheses. But actually, that's been that drop in prices has been good news for the operators in their ability to try to stay alive until the crude price comes back.
The drop in the oil prices has not been good news, but certainly the discounts that we're getting from the service companies have allowed us to stay in business, although obviously, as you said, it's been devastating for the service companies.
John, thank you very much. We're really happy to have John Farina as an EKTI associate. Watch for John's upcoming EKTI podcasts and YouTube videos presenting more detail on upstream technologies. Thanks for listening. To learn more about the important oil and gas industry, be sure to check out our free Oil 101 series at www.ektinteractive.com.